All right, tonight we're going to do critter proofing, season extension, and garden carpentry. So a lot of critter proofing in the season extension is going to be you're going to need some garden carpentry skills. So that's why we kind of put it all together. Once the pandemic's over, we'll have carpentry classes again at our tool share over on Twin Oaks, which we'll get a chance to do some hands-on things. But we postponed that class for now. Hopefully, maybe in this summer we'll get bring that series back. But in the meantime, we made it into an online class with lots of videos and lots of great information. And then we'll talk about critters, not so much that the pests, not bugs or anything, but more about the fuzzy little critters that can oftentimes be way more destructive, like squirrels and deers and things like that. So and then season extension means just growing outside the normal growing season. So our normal growing season is like, early spring to late fall. But then if you want to grow all winter, there's different things that you can build to extend your season. So yeah, like I said, our schedule, we're going to do critter proofing, talk about how to deal with some critters, talk about season extensions, and then the rest of the class we'll talk about some carpentry skills, like the type of wood you're looking for, how to select the right wood, type of hardware, power tools, hand tools, and then we'll have a couple lessons on how to build raised beds. All right, so first part, critter proofing. So one of the worst critters in DC, especially if you live near Rock Creek or DuPont Forest, are deer. They can get in your garden. They will eat everything. They can do some serious damage. So there's lots of different ways you could do it. You can keep them away. You can build structures. This is a cattle fence, the ones with the really narrow holes, and these are T-posts that you can just pound them in, and then they got little latches that you can put cattle fence in. It's super easy to put up. You can do some fencing. Sometimes though they can jump. Especially if they have can get a running start. I mean, supposedly I heard they can jump over 10 feet. But definitely, like, I think 6 feet or 8 feet, you got a pretty good chance of keeping them out. But one thing that confuses them is they don't have very good depth perception. So that's why you'll see a lot of farms. They won't build high fences. They'll build wide fences. So they'll do something like this with a slanted board and different wire. And that way, like if a deer can't see easily over it with their bad depth of perception, they won't jump over it. So that's another way if you don't want to build a tall fence. But then there's other things you could do as well to kind of deter them, like different kinds of repellents. Like they hate, or not they hate, I mean, they're afraid of, or supposedly they're afraid of humans. I feel like the urban deer are definitely getting used to us, but if they smell humans, they'll stay away. And one great way to get the scent of humans out is to go to a barber shop and ask them for extra hair. Or if you cut your own hair, grab that hair and then you could sprinkle that hair around your garden. And that should work. If it rains really hard and things like that, you'll have to do it again. But that works. Or any strong scents, like dryer sheets are supposed to be really good at keeping them out. So hanging dryer sheets around, but again, you got to do that like once a week. Liquid fence and predator, urine sprays, which at first I heard that I was like, how did they get the predator's urine? But I found out it's synthetic. But what they do is they spray like coyote urine, a synthetic urine that smells just like coyote urine or something like that, and they'll spray that around the area, and that will keep them away. Again, it's a temporary solution. Once it rains, you got to respray it. There are plants that they don't really like, or at least are really good at covering up the scent of the crops that they like. So think of like perennial herbs, like really, smelling ones like lavender and rosemary and mint for sure. Definitely though, be careful with mint. Plant it in pots. Don't plant it in the ground. It'll like spread like crazy. But you can do pots of mint around your garden, and that should disguise the scent at least. And then also, just having, if you have a dog, let your dog run around and play around your garden. I wouldn't recommend letting your dog in your garden because there's some sanitation stuff with them using the bathroom on your garden. But you can let them run around your garden, and that will help. because the deer will smell the scent of your dogs and will stay away because they'll think they're predator. Scarecrows and things like that. I don't know how successful those are, but ultimately, like the best thing for deer is this what's this motion sensor spray, and what it is Have a Heart makes them, and a bunch of different kinds of makes them. They can be range from like $20 to like $100 depending on if you want. Some have their own reservoir, some you have to attach a hose, some have batteries, some are solar power. So there's a lot of different varieties. But what it does is it has like one of those motion sensor lasers, scanning the area, and then as soon as a deer walks by it, it will spray, the whole area really quickly, and it will scare the deer. The deer will run off, and hopefully, and the hope is the deer remembers that and doesn't come back. You'll also spray your dog. You'll probably accidentally spray yourself a couple times, but at the same time, like hands down, when I talk to people dealing with deer, this is like the best solution for deer, especially if you have like a general way where the deer's coming from. If they're coming from any direction, you might have to get a couple of them. But if you only have one general direction they're coming from, they'll scan that whole direction. And I actually have a video to kind of show you how that works. There's no sound, but this is yeah, let's play it. So that's all it really does, but it's on all night. And oh, here's another one. All right. You can see that. I mean, they go pretty far, and it can cover a whole area. It can definitely rotate as it sprays. So this one, like I said, like hands down, this is like the best thing I've heard for dealing with deer. Then you got the smaller little critters, squirrels, rabbits, and rats. So squirrels are the main ones. Rabbits, there's some rabbits. I've never encountered any, but I'm sure there are some rabbits, especially near like I guess Rock Creek or something. I'm not really sure their habitats, but I've heard there are some wild ones around here, and rats are an issue if especially if you have a garden downtown or have a garden that's close to an alleyway that has dumpsters. Rats, typically rats love rotting food. They love dumpsters, and or bad compost piles. So we'll have a whole class on compost, and we'll talk about how not to have a compost pile that attracts rats. But the problem is once the rats come, once they're attracted to that dumpster, and then they hang out in your garden, and they see you have tomatoes and sweet potatoes in the ground and squash, they may hang around and start eating on your food as well. So definitely. Um, yeah, they can be a problem. So but all three of these you use pretty similar techniques for small mammals. If you want to save them, there's these Have a Heart cages. So Have a Heart has all different kinds of. They have the deer sprayers. They have cages and stuff. And the idea is you kind of bait it on this little trap, and they walk in and they step on the bait trap, and then the door shuts. And but the thing about Have a Heart is you got to check it every day because they will freak out in those cages, and if you leave them in there for a day or two, they're going to have a heart attack and die, and then it's like, what's the point of trying to like capture them? So you need to check that every day. Melons work, like cantaloupe and things are amazing bait, for different kinds of animals like groundhogs and rats and squirrels. So but you can use a variety of different baits. And the thing is that just give you a heads up, you're not it's not exactly I don't know if it's like illegal or it's just yeah, it's a misdemeanor or whatever, but it's not legit to like take the animals, capture them, and take them to another side to drop them off of the forest or anything like that. So just giving you full disclosure, people still do it. I imagine like if you ever got caught by a park ranger, you would probably get a ticket. So if you capture one of them and you drive to the other side of the city to release at a park, definitely make sure there's no park rangers or anything. And Yeah, so it's really up to you. Just full disclosure, you're not supposed to do this. Like yeah, so, so I just leave it up to you. And then another thing, a lot of times, like squirrels, you'll see like tomatoes, like you'll see like one bite out of all your tomatoes, or you'll have all these big juicy tomatoes, and there'll be one little bite, and they just like ruin the whole crop. And it looks like they're just being jerks, but in reality, what they're doing is they're thirsty. So that's why they're not eating the whole tomato. They're just taking a little bite and then they're sipping on the moisture. And then they come back, later when they're thirsty again, take a little bite and sip on the moisture. So that's why it looks like they're just being, jerks. So a couple ways to get around that if that's happening to you, and that will happen with fruit trees. Like I've heard, like seen that happen with peaches and a lot like juicy stuff, like tomatoes, things like that. So if that's happening to you, one way that you can get around that is actually provide a water source, some kind of bird bath, water dish, something like that. But again, I mean, DC, well, the problem with that is DC has, horrible mosquito problems. So if you do that, get this is called Mosquito Dunks. This is great if you have any kind of sitting water, like rain barrels or anything like that. You want to throw like a mosquito dunk in there, like once a week or something like that. It's all organic. It's just a bunch of biology that eats mosquito larvae, and that's it. You can drink it. We can drink it. Squirrels can drink it. It's not harmful, but it'll keep mosquitoes from coming out of your bird bath. So that's one way to try it. So if that's happening to you, try that out and see if that works. Other things you could do, hot pepper sprays, or hot pepper flakes. So you can take out, hot pepper flakes and just, flake, sprinkle them around your garden. And then when they come sniffing, they'll sniff some hot pepper flake and they won't come back. Again, after you have to reapply after it rains. Same with hot pepper sprays. You can blend or ferment hot peppers, garlic, onions, things like that. There was a recipe. There's actually a video showing how to do that in the last class. Because hot pepper sprays are great for a lot of different pests, but they're also really great for squirrels. Mix in a little Dr. Bronner soap so it sticks a little bit to the plant, so it's not just like it's not just going to all wash off. Definitely wear goggles and gloves and when you're applying them, but that works really well as well. You just have to reapply it a lot. So that's the downfall. Same with like, determinants. We talked about these things like in the last, like dog hair or dogs, I'm sorry, hair, herbs, things like that, really strong herbs. You could try the motion sensor sprays. I mean, it's a little bit hard to get the squirrels, but if you have, if they're coming from one direct route, you can set it up and see what happens for sure. Um, and then there's other things like squirrel feeders. I don't know. I mean, I've read that this has been successful, but I haven't had any firsthand accounts. But the idea behind this is you create actually, some of the favorite foods like seeds and you fill it up. And you can make it like some of them are really cute, like their little picnic tables and stuff. And the idea is that as long as you keep on filling that up once a week, they're going to be full on their favorite food, and they're not going to bother with your garden. So only problem is, I mean, maybe it's like with all that, these bait traps and stuff. It could attract more things to your garden as well. So just have to, keep an eye out when you try them out. The best thing you could do though is like hardware cloth cages. We'll talk more about different kinds of cages, but setting up different kinds of hardware. Like this is this garden's not around unfortunately anymore, but Brain Food, it was this nonprofit, awesome like youth development nonprofit that has amazing garden and basically in Chinatown. Yeah, they're surrounded by dumpsters everywhere, so they had all kinds of rat pressure. But I helped them out building. We built a lot of harbor cloth tops. So this is a raised bed full of strawberries, and we just built 2x4s, but on a couple of hinges, and then stapled harbor cloth to the top. And yeah, they couldn't get through, so that saved all their strawberries. So that's definitely another option. That's probably one of your better options, especially if you don't want to reapply things every week. And then if you have a bird feeder, they're going to eat all your bird feed. So if you want to save it, you can actually mix in some cayenne pepper into that bird feeder, because birds actually don't. I've heard they don't have a sense of taste, not a strong enough sense of taste to actually detect hot things. So they'll still love the bird, the seeds, but then the squirrels will definitely stay away from them. And then rat burrows. So unfortunately, it shouldn't happen if you got if you're taking care of your garden, you're not letting things rot on the ground, you don't have a smelly compost bin, and you're not like close to a dumpster. You shouldn't ever have to worry about rats, but it does happen every once in a while, and it's good to at least know about. We'll talk about some remedies, especially mostly we try to mainly stay towards the organic remedies in our gardens for rats. But if this is something you're like, I just don't want to deal with this, if this ever happens, just call exterminator. But also don't wait, don't let because they reproduce really quickly. So if are just like, oh, I'll deal with that next month, you may be dealing with a lot more rats next month. So definitely, as soon as you see the rat holes, either call exterminator or go out and try out a couple of these organic methods that we're going to talk about. But the first thing to do is if you see holes in your garden and in the ground, you want to identify what type of holes they are. And the easiest way to do that is just kind of measuring the diameter of the hole. So if you have super small holes, like less than an inch, those are typically like native bees, like carpenter bees and mason bees who like to live in the ground a lot. So those you don't have to worry so much. Maybe carpenter bees you might have to worry about, but that's a whole nother solution, a whole nother discussion. And then if they're a little bit bigger, like 1 to 2 inches, they could be moles. We'll talk about moles in a second. Not as bad, still something to deal with, but not as bad as rats. Rat holes are typically 2 to 4 inches. So if you see a 2 to 4 inch hole, is a pretty good chance that you got some rats in the hole. And then if you see anything bigger, like you see like 6 inches or bigger, that's a groundhog. So another pretty awful thing to deal with as well. We have a whole bunch of groundhogs at our letterer farm, and we're constantly trying to trap them. So like I said, rats aren't going to come to your garden because you're growing tomatoes. They want rotting, smelling stuff, like compost, bad compost bins or dumpsters. But then, once they're in the area, they might, look over and see your garden, and then they might chew on some things in your garden. They definitely, I've had gardens that had bad rat infestations. I've noticed they definitely ate tomatoes, squash, and they dug up a lot of sweet potatoes as well. So yeah, it's definitely something to consider. And especially in the winter, maybe they may be looking for extra habitat, so that if you have a giant pile of brush, that could be, a place that they could hang out in the winter. So that's something, it's definitely something to think about. So if you do have, rats, you want to immediately kind of remove, if you have bad compost, especially if it's your backyard, just throw all the compost away. Don't try to, if you have a rats, don't try to fix it up, or if you have like rotting fruit on the ground, pick all that up. If you have a lot of, dog waste, dog poop on the ground, that can attract, try to clean all that up. So you want to eliminate the food, because a lot of times if there's really great food for them, they're not going to, take the bait, and then like I said, you can either one just call an exterminator and don't even have to worry about it, or you can try to deal with it yourself. If you got a huge heart, you can try to have a heart cages. But there's definitely, if you have some holes, there probably some families in there, so it's going to be hard to get all of them with have a heart cages. So then the next option is you can do some poison. um yeah, rats really like dog poop and things like that. So animal poop. That was a big thing about having chickens in DC, because they were worried about that rats were going to be attracted to chicken, poop, which is a possibility, but that's why it's people try to um, do healthy practices, like try to rotate them and things like that, so it doesn't actually accumulate and attract things. But yeah, I mean, if you have a lot of just dog poop sitting around, it's possible. I mean, I know a lot of people with dogs that poop in their yards, and they don't have any rat issues. So a lot of this is like hit or miss, so it's not like you got, yeah. So but they definitely, I've heard that they definitely will, if there's really stinky yards, they can be attracted to that, or that's a possibility. um so for poison, you got two choices with poison. You can get some of this like really toxic poison stuff, or you can get there's some organic ones. And the toxic poison here comes in this little tray. where you can either sit it out or what I would really recommend if you have these pellets, don't just sit it out in the open because then like dogs and cats and other things are going to eat it, and then you don't want that to happen. What you want to do is you want to shove a handful of this into the hole and take a stick and just push it as deep down in the hole as possible for two reasons. One is you don't want dogs and cats to eat it, and then two, an exterminator once told me that if there's like stuff on the just on the edge of the hole, they don't pay attention to it, but if it's like at least a foot in the hole, they will notice it and pick it up and take it in and eat it. So you want to get it as deep as possible, or like a lot of, like if you're what the main thing that DGS, or DGS, the Department of General Services, that maintains all DC government property, so they have a rat division, and like they use a lot of poison, but when they don't usually use the pebbles. The main thing they use is these containers. I'm sure everyone's seen them all over the city. So this is great because a rat can get in to eat these poison blocks, but then dogs and cats can't get in. So it's a lot safer for pets and things like that. And you just put those around the area, and that are but like I said, if there was a bunch of rotting compost, they're not going to smell this poison. They're going to keep on going to the rotting compost. So you got to remove that the other smells, and then they'll get attracted to this. So that's another way you can do it. Just put one of these by the holes, and that should take care of it. There is, if you don't want to introduce poison to your garden, there is this organic poison you can get at Ace Hardware called Rat X. There's definitely mixed reviews. I've heard good reviews and bad reviews. As I've tried it, I felt like it worked, but sometimes it's hard to tell if the rats really, if you really got the rats, or if they moved on, or what. But I'm definitely, we use this. Well, we don't try to put poison near the garden, so we use this mainly for and yeah, it seems like I would give it like a 50-50. It's like moderately, it works moderately well. um and then yeah, and also when you're using the poison, you want to kind of walk the area like every day or every other day, because sometimes normally when they get sick they go in the hole and then to die. But if they die out in the open, you want to put them in the trash before a dog or something eats it. So um so that and then the idea with this is like you bait the holes, and then I usually bait the holes, and then I'll come back in a couple of days. I'll cover up the holes, and then if there's new holes, and I'll repeat. I'll keep on baiting them, and then and come back a couple of days and cover them up. And then the idea is when they're gone, because typically you're not going to ever see the dead rats. So when they're gone is when there's no more holes in the area. So that's what you want to kind of repeat that process until you get them all. Another easier way, we actually just did this for the new farmer building that had a lot of rat holes. So we actually picked up a couple blocks of dry ice from Harris Teeter's. Harris Teeter and a lot of liquor stores has dry ice. Dry ice is really great. It's like carbon monoxide. So what you do, you definitely want to have gloves and safety glasses and things, but you just chisel off a handful of dry ice, shove it down the hole, get a stick, push it as far down as you can, and then shove newspaper into that hole. And then you do that for every hole, and then it fills up with carbon monoxide. And it's one way to take out some rats. It's horrible, but it's actually it's better than the poison. The poison is a lot more painful from what I've read. You can do similar ways with like generators and exhausts. If you get a hose to an exhaust pipe or something, you can gas them out. Another way, I almost tried this one of our parks, but actually the dry ice ended up working. Is I know they do this in New York. Is there's a lot of dogs that are bred to hunt rats, like rat terriers, pinschers, schnauzers. If you put a call out, on your local listserv for, hey, whoever has some of these dogs, can you bring them over to my garden and let them run around and play? They'll hunt out. They'll definitely hunt some rats. And I know there are special units, and I know New York and other places, they're really expensive, but they use dogs for rat hunting. So that's another possibility. But like I said, this is all like, I don't want to deal with this. Just call exterminator, and then you don't have to deal with let them deal with it. If you want to learn more about not only how to all right. So next we're going to show you
a video on how actually to treat rat burrows with dry ice. They call it rat ice, but it's no different than dry ice.
This is rat ice. It's dry ice. It uses carbon dioxide to kill the rats. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put as many of these as I can fit into the burrow. And it's going to start to give off gas. That gas is going to serve as the agent that's going to kill the rodents. I shove this into the hole. What that does is that prevents any gas from escaping. And then we seal that up. We move on to the next hole. And this takes a few hours to give off all the gas. And right now it's about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So that means it should probably last till about 5, maybe 7 o'clock tonight, giving off gas, which should give it enough time for the rats to remain dormant. And this pile of dirt over here was excavated by the rats. They're living underneath this concrete pad. It's kind of a good spot for them. Provides a real good shelter. So I put the paper in there to act as a barrier between the ice and the surface. Don't keep any animals or innocent bystanders from coming in contact with it. And as well, keep the gas in the hole. Kind of make it, kind of seal it off to some extent. It also acts as a monitor, let me know if what I did worked. I can come back, I can revisit the property, and if nothing's pushed these out of the holes or new holes haven't emerged in a couple of days, then I can be satisfied with my treatment. Otherwise, we know that something's still living around there and we need to reapply, which is possible. The label states that you're supposed to apply this for 2 to 3 visits consecutively in order to gain success. So, one visit might knock down 90% of the population. That other 10% is usually what you really need to focus on. Because if you don't, population will rebuild again itself in a matter of months, weeks sometimes, depending on the food source and the time of year.
If you want to learn more about not only how to make a garden, especially if you're in a community garden or a large farm and you want to make sure the whole garden isn't ever going to attract rats, New York City's health division Department of Health actually has a rat academy. It's free. You don't have to live in New York. You can sign up to register. There's special ones for community gardens to kind of help them, because there's just a lot of things like not leaving clutter, not having giant piles of waste, like not having hiding spots, not having rotting food, things like that you can do to prevent any of them from coming. But if you're one in the city community gardens as well, you can also just let us know and we'll bring out DGS's rat crew as well. All right, so let's move on from rats. So birds, birds are definitely probably one of the more worst ones. They will definitely eat a whole bunch off of your. So there are some things you could do, like especially like if you just direct seed it someplace. If you don't want them flying down and eating your direct seed, you can lay a light layer of straw or some burlap over that. to prevent them from eating up your seeds. That's what a lot of people do when they like reseeded lawn or something like that. They'll cover it up so birds won't get it all. So it's the very same concept. A lot of times, sounds and lights and things like that will scare them. So hanging like, I don't know if people still listen to CDs, but shiny CDs and soda cans and Mylar tape and pie pans, or metal wind chimes that can make noise, or also having like motion sensors, but with noise, having some kind of noise, when they get to, when a bird flies close, it will definitely scare them away. And also motion sensor sprays, you can try it. I mean, I think the bird's got to be a little bit big, but it can definitely, if you have a small area, I definitely can try a motion sensor spray. You could do predatory scarecrows like owls, get some rubber snakes, put them in the garden. Definitely heard modern success with that stuff. But or you can just feed them, like get some bird feeders, put them away from your garden, so then they all hang out away from your garden and they're full. So instead of looking for food in your garden, they know they could just go to this bird feeder and fill it up. So netting structures, a lot of people will use netting. Only problem with netting is they get caught in it, and then you gotta like either like pull out a freaked out live bird, or pull out a dead bird as well. So, and small animals will get caught in it. And I wouldn't recommend netting structures. I mean, it's definitely something you got to worry. It can be more of a mess, but if you want to try it, definitely just be warned. And then, like I said, the best thing is hardware cloth cages as well. And we'll talk more about different types of hardware cloth cages. So hardware cloth is like super duper chicken wire, like chicken wire a rat can just run through, but hardware cloth, rats aren't getting, or animals and birds aren't getting through that. So it's a little bit more pricey, but it's definitely worth it. And then you got groundhogs, wolves, and moles. So groundhogs are definitely the worst. I've never had wolves and moles, so I can't say how bad they are, but they could be bad, from what I hear. So a couple of things: if you're trying to fence out a groundhog or moles, a lot of times they'll dig holes underneath the fence. So if you're putting in the fence, which is great, this is actually hardware cloth. You just want to bury it, a foot or so down into the ground. So dig a trench around there, bury the hardware cloth, and then put it over. And that way they won't be able to dig underneath. You don't have to go too far deep, but definitely try to do like 6 inches or to a foot, and that should keep them out. Or if you have a raised bed, you could put some hardware cloth on the bottom. If you have gopher, groundhogs and stuff in the area, and that way when they try to dig underneath, they won't get to it. These sonic spikes are supposed to work really well with moles and gophers and voles, since it's like horrible, sonic, thing that we can't hear into the ground, and it supposedly keeps them away. If you could see the holes, like these are mold damage and vole damage, if you could see, you can actually drop some repellent in there, like peppermint oil. They hate peppermint oil, so if you get like 100% essential peppermint oil, drop some in their holes, that they're going to leave those holes really quickly. But also like fabric softener sheets and things like that. Herbs as well can deter them, and have a heart cages. So that's what we do for our groundhogs. Just because in melons you got to get a big cage. You got to get the right size cage, but they love cantaloupe. So we caught all of our groundhogs using cantaloupe. So definitely, that's probably the best way to get rid of them. But a lot of times when you capture them, like these animals are kind of territorial, so they'll keep other ones out, but as soon as you capture them, there'll be another one sometime soon. So it can be a process, but and then critter cages, this is probably the best thing to do, because you don't have to completely spray things. You don't have to, deal with, deal with like, crazy tricks. And especially if you make it out hardware cloth. So this is 1/2 inch hardware cloth. There's 1/2 inch for that will keep out rats, and if you have mice problems, like in a compost bin, typically you don't have mice in gardens. Mice are actually good for gardens. They actually eat a lot of weed seeds, so they're not bad. But then if you have a bad compost pile, you'll get mice, and it could be somewhat of an issue at that point. But mainly rats are the real issue. So if you use this hardware cloth, and you can make hoops, we'll show you how to bend some hoops in a second. So you can do hoops. You could do just build a wood frame, and just staple the hardware cloth on. There's a lot of different types of systems that you can build as well. So either using hoops or building some kind of frames and with on hinges as well. Um, All right. So that's the critter section. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about season extension, and then we'll talk more about carpentry towards the end. So season extension. So this is like if you want to grow in the winter, or if you want to grow if you want to grow throughout the winter, or if you want to get an early start, like if you want to plant in early March, and but then get some hoops up to protect against frost, or there's a different this is mainly what you're extending the growing season basically throughout the winter. So there's definitely one way to do it is row covers. So we talked a lot already about row covers being used for pest protection, using special kind of like summer grade pest covers that you can have as a floating cover, or you can bend these hoops and throw it over your hoops. So that's one way to deal with like pests, but then you can also use these same kind of covers for winter protection. And sometimes you can get different thickness to the covers. The thicker you get, the less light that will go through. But at the same time, so you got to do a balance between how much light you want versus how much how cold it's going to get. Sometimes if it's going to get really cold, you may want to throw some extra layer, a thick layer over, or double up on your layer, and then once that cold point, once that winter storm passes, you can go back to a single layer and allow more light to go on. So it's definitely kind of a fluid thing. But what's great about so they call them, the two main people that make this winter covers are Remay and Agribon. So it's like Kleenex. I forget what that word, but it's like the company becomes the word for it. But Remay or Agribon means row covers. They're cloth covers. I really love these cloth covers as opposed to some other options we'll talk about, like plastic, because it breaks the wind. So there is a little bit of circulation going through. So there's a little bit of wind. So you are getting circulation, but it breaks the really bad winter winds. It provides some insulation. And then the best thing it does is it provides frost protection. So on the frost, will accumulate on the covers, and they won't touch your plants. And as long as the frost isn't touching your plants aren't going to get much frost damage. So this is actually letter gardens. This is what we put up because we planted too early, and we had that late March winter freeze. So we actually doubled up our layers, and we used different kinds of 4x4s that were scrapped to weigh it all down. We'll talk about in a second how to actually build these. And so with these Remay, like the idea, they have numbers to it, like Agribon 15, Agribon 50. So the lower the number, the lighter it is, and the more light gets through, and then the higher number, the more. I probably wouldn't go beyond 50. That blocks about 50% of the light. Anything more than that, and you're not going to get enough light to really grow your plants. But what's nice is it's breathable. Like if you're using plastic, you got to open up that plastic, every day, or you're going to get fungal issues and things. But this, you never have to take it off unless you want to harvest it or kind of check on your plants. So it's pretty great. Like the rain will go through, your watering systems will go through, so your sprinklers and stuff. So you can, like I'll water these with a hose on top of it and just let all the water. Yeah, it just goes completely through. So when you're building these, so you want low tunnel specs. So it's these are also called low tunnels, these row covers, because you're essentially creating like low tiny tunnels. But so how so the idea with this is you want to, if let's say you're growing kale, you want that kale to get, you can look up how tall that kale is going to get. And if that kale is going to get about 1.5 feet, you want to make that row cover about 2 feet tall. The idea is you don't want this to actually grow into the row cover, because then if the frost touches the row cover, and that plant is touching the row cover, it's still going to get frost damage on that part of that plant. So you want to have it taller than your plants, but at the same time, you don't want it too tall where it's going to be flimsy and it's going to be hard to build. So you want to try to look up your height of your plants and just try to guess as best as you can. And then and the other factor to consider is how wide you want these hoops to be. So if you make them too wide, that row cover is just going to dip down on top of your plants and then come back up. So you want to, depending on what material you use as a hoop, you want to have it, no more than ideally 2 to 3 feet distance. You can experiment with it, and if you have extra hoops, try to use it. Usually people don't, they space it out far apart because they don't have enough hoops. But if you can afford to get a bunch of hoops, try to get it, every 2 feet or so between each hoop. And then the idea is you don't want it more than 4 feet or more than a raised bed width, because it's just going to, especially using certain materials, it's not going to, it's going to fall into it in itself, and it's going to be hard to build. So Lori says Liddy has landscape fabric on sale today for $4. Nice, with 32 feet by 5 feet for $4. Awesome. And then low tunnel fasteners. So once you bend the we'll talk about how to bend the hoops in a second, but once you bend the hoops and then you put the material over, you got to hold everything down. So there's a lot of different ways to hold it down, from typically people use sandbags on most farms. They can use clamps as well. There's special made clamps that snaps just on your hoops, or you can buy some of these clamps. Some people they like to have a static side where they'll actually use some of these landscape fabric. They'll roll up one side to get a nice bunch, and then they'll use the landscape staple and then put it over the bunch. The idea is you don't want to just put a bunch of landscape staples in it like landscape fabric, because then it's going to tear all over. This stuff is pretty fragile, but you want to kind of bunch it up and try to get get the whole bunch in between the two posts on the stake. And that's if you just want to have a static side where you keep shut the whole time, and then the other side is the one that you weigh down with sandbags or wood boards and then open that up. But you don't want to use landscape staples if you're constantly pulling them in and out, because then that's just going to rip your fabric to pieces. So another way, you can sew some of these thicker fabrics, and some people will sew a sleeve on it, and then they'll run a pole through that sleeve, and that way they can roll it all completely over and roll it to the other side, which is that would be amazing, because it can be a kind of a burden sometimes to take it off and harvest and then put it back on with all your stuff. And then building the hoops, there's multiple different things that you can make to use the hoops. So we'll go through each one of them. PVC is the easiest and cheapest. You can just bend it yourself. Some people will hammer some rebar into the ground, and then the PVC is hollow, so they'll just put it over the PVC and bend it, and then you get a super easy hoop. The only thing about PVC is it is something that it's not the ideal plastic that you want in your garden. It's one of it will if it's wet and the sun's on it, it will leach out some nasty stuff. A lot of people still use it. A lot of people think it's not that much, and it's pretty insignificant, and it will wash away in your soil. Other people who want to be totally organic and pure, won't bring PVC. So it's really up to you. If you do use it, I recommend putting the post on the outside of the garden. So because what happens is it gets wet and the sun hits it, and it will leach out in the water, and then so it will just follow the water. So it's not going to drip onto your soil. It's going to just follow this into the ground right here. So if there is, if you do end up accumulating some stuff, it's not in your actual garden. It's on your walkway. So definitely up to you if you want to use PVC. Other people will use another cheap option is they'll use metal tension wire. You want to use 9 gauge or larger. The smaller the number, the thicker the gauge with this metal wire. And you want to get some bolt cutters or some metal snips, really strong metal snips. And this is nice because they're cheap, they're easy to make. You can just shove straight in the ground. But a lot of people, they're not good for very wide distances. Like we try to use them for our 4 foot wide beds, and we're having all kinds of issues with them. So they're more for like 2 feet wide. Like if you're doing tiny rows, especially a lot of people will use them inside a hoop house, which is like a giant row cover that we'll talk about in a second. So it works all right, but again, like it'll bend. It's not that structurally sound. So it's not the best product. This is actually we just discovered this because we had a bunch of these metal wires and they weren't working very well, and we didn't want to go, didn't know what to do, and then we had all this extra irrigation tubing, this polyethylene irrigation tubing. It's super cheap. People get it for like drip irrigation, systems. Polyethylene is like one of the plastics that's okay to have in the garden. It's actually much better plastic as opposed to PVC that you don't want in the garden. And like I said, super cheap. I mean, it's like $10, get it like 100 feet, and you can just get some like pruners. You can cut it off. You could shove it straight into the ground, or you can put it you could put some rebar or in this hollow as well, like that, like PVC. And this we did this in the pinch because the metal wasn't working, and it works really, really great. This is probably one of my favorite material now to use. You want to get about 1/2 inch. It could be anywhere from 1/4 inch to 3/4 inch, but I felt like 1/2 inch was like it was durable enough, and at the same time still bent really well. And it was just super easy to make. And you can order this from most hardware stores or irrigation places. Just don't order the IPS. The IPS is a special expensive kind that it can fit into. It's made to fit into normal plumbing. So it's just, yeah, you don't need that extra expensive stuff. But I definitely recommend this. It's really easy to use. And then if you want to go more permanent, long-term, Conduit is a really great alternative. But it's a little bit more upfront money. You're going to have to bend them, which we'll talk about. I'll show you a video on how to actually bend them. So Conduit is like you can find this in the electrical aisle at Home Depot or any hardware store. It's what people they'll run a lot of electrical wires and through the conduit, and then they'll bury the conduit. It's normally made out of either galvanized steel or aluminum. I've only used aluminum ones, which is pretty easy to bend. I don't know if the galvanized steel is as easy to bend or not. I imagine that's a little bit harder, but you want to use 1/2 inch. And we did talk about earlier about aluminum being not that great material to use in the garden. I actually did, I looked it up somewhat. Aluminum can actually leach some things that can actually hurt, can stunt different kinds of root growth. So that's why you don't want to use like aluminum, like raised bed or something like that. But a lot of people think a lot of this stuff, especially like this conduit, that even if it does leach a little bit, it's not going to be any significant amount that's going to cause any kind of like damage to your root systems or anything like that, or any kind of toxicity levels. I mean, there's natural occurring aluminum already, but but everything I read, like the bend, the hoop endings and things like that, isn't that big of a deal. They do advise not using entire aluminum, raised beds and metal beds as well. But definitely, I mean, if you're concerned, do your own research. And I'm going to, yeah, after doing research, I definitely feel okay with keep on using these conduit. But what you get them in like 8-foot sections, and you gotta get these special called hoop benders, which we have a whole bunch of them in our tool share, and you gotta screw them onto the table, and then you can actually bend that hoop. And then if it's too big, and you use a hacksaw to just shorten it. But I'm actually going to show a video of how to actually make your own hoop bender and how the bending actually works.
I'm about halfway done making the hoops for my raised beds that I'm going to put some row cover over. This side's already been done, and you can see it works out pretty nicely. And these hoops are made out of 1/2 inch conduit, and they fit right into the beds. I just custom made the bend on there, and that's what I'm going to show you how to do today, and I did it for free with some scrap material. So the first thing was my beds are about 46 inches from the inside to the inside walls there. So when you make your jig for this, it's 1/2-inch conduit, so there's a 1/2 inch given up on each side. So you actually want the inside of the curve to be a 45-inch curve, which means a 22.5-inch radius of curvature for the bed. I also have about 6 inches of straight tubing down at the bottom there where it's going to go into the ground, so the curve starts even with the top of the bed. And as you can see, it turned out pretty well. All the hoops are fairly uniform and look pretty clean. So this fabric is working quite well. It keeps the dogs out and the deer out, and the kids and the bugs and the wind from destroying my garden. So I'm hoping to finish out the last few hoops down here, and I'll show you how I did it. Okay, so here's the jig for bending the 1/2-inch conduit for my hoops. And I put down a nail in the middle here point, tied a string to it. I cut the string already, put a pencil on it, and then just measured out from here all the way to the first nail, this one, to be my distance that I want for my radius, since I want it to be about 45 all the way across for the inside of my curve. So I took half that for 22.5 inches to this first nail. I put it about 2 inches or so away from the end. Same with the pivot point here. I put it about a couple inches from the end, and then I take your string and then just swing a big arc all the way across the top there and pencil it out. Then I just took a bunch of wood screws, a couple inches long, just drilled them right through this piece of subfloor that I had laying around. Made an arc out of the screws, left them about an inch tall or so, and then on the starting side here I screwed down a 2x4 and I had it extend about 6 inches from here to here to give me the straight part for my hoops that will go in the ground. So to use it, basically just stick the piece of conduit in to about here so that it lines up just down the tunnel, and then grab the end and then just start bending it around the curve until you come out to this side. And then if you have any extra over here, just cut it off at about 6 inches. I did have a piece of wood over on this side, but it was kind of a pain to get it to lock in there, and I had to fight the metal. The screws do get bent up a little bit, and I would recommend having a lot of screws at the beginning because it takes a good bit of the force, and they do kind of get bent up. It doesn't work very well with 3/4 inch or inch conduit. It just is too hard to bend. It'll bend the screws over from what I've tried. So it works with 1/2 inch, but not with the thicker stuff that I've tried.
All right. So that's if you want to make, conduits. Like I said, I have benders if you don't want to make your own bender. But for sure. So Lori actually said, folks use, I've seen videos where folks use hula hoops as tubing. Yeah, for sure. I mean, especially if you cut that in half, I mean, that would actually be perfect tubing. Yeah, so there's, probably lots of different ways we can do tubing as well. So like for example, another way is like the concrete wire mesh. So this is the stuff you could find in the concrete aisle. They put this in to reinforce concrete walls. It's really great for making tomato cages because you can actually stick your hand through it as opposed to the cattle fencing that you can't. But this also makes really great. You can actually, just buy one up. They're only a couple dollars. At least they were before the pandemic. So who knows? And you just bend it over and make a nice hoop. And then whenever you need to, you can throw your row covers over. And then so that's and then if you want some extra protection, like if you got a really nasty storm coming, or if you just you don't mind and opening up things every once in a while, you can use plastic covers. So plastic covers, you can definitely use just any kind of plastic, like the painter's plastic that covers your chairs and stuff, and from a hardware store. You can buy specially made plastic that's got it's been sprayed with this UV protection stuff on one side. That will last a lot longer, because all plastic eventually deteriorates in the sun. So you can buy more years if you pay for more expensive plastic. But I mean that the generic plastic works really well. The idea is you can either throw it over your hoops and kind of weigh things down, and then that's going to give you super protection. I mean, that's like a little mini greenhouse. um, um, but so it's great if you got some really nasty storms coming. The only downside is you have to air it out, because it'll just get so humid and so fungal. You have a lot of fungal issues, and especially if you have a really hot day, like you need to open it up or you're going to fry your plants, because it'll get too hot in there. So definitely if you use that, take it out during the day, especially the hot part of the day. A lot of people will make permanent structures. They'll make like a 2x4 frame, and then they'll actually attach they'll attach the hoops to the frame, and then they'll staple the plastic over. And that's really nice, because you can easily kind of throw it up and over. It fits really nice on top of a raised bed. So that's really cool as well. And you can even like drill holes into the wood, and shove the conduit in there. So it works really good. You can use it as a temporary. You can make it permanent. A lot of people will use hybrids. This is what I use, because I don't like to air things out every day. So I just use the fabric, and then if there's a really bad storm coming, I'll throw some plastic over it, and then when the storms pass, I'll take the plastic off. And so definitely lots of options. And then you can actually build little mini cold frames. So cold frames are little mini greenhouses, that they're really great to harden off your plants. If you want to, when you're ready to harden them off, you put them in this, and you keep the door open during the day and close it at night, so it won't get too cold. So you can actually build ones that will fit. You can even get go to that used hardware store. What's it called? I forget what it's called. It's in the Hyattsville. It's on the tip of my tongue. If anyone can remember. But it's a deconstruction used hardware store where they have community forklift. So community forklift, if you don't know about them, it's like basically where everyone who actually wants to deconstruct their stuff and not just like demo everything, and they take it to these places and donate it for tax write-offs, and then you can get all kinds of construction material for super cheap. And you can get like window frames and things like that will fit over your whole raised bed. So that's great. You can definitely have to open it up during your hot parts of the day, but I mean, it's it's another great way to kind of keep your things cool, growing throughout the winter. And if you haven't if you haven't checked out community forklift, it's pretty amazing. Just be careful though, if you buy stuff that's got paint on it. If it's really old paint, it may have some lead in it, so you just want to kind of chip off that all the paint if you're not sure how old it is or not. And then the ultimate, overwintering is hoop houses. So you can, so hoop houses are really great. I mean, it's like the same idea, bending. You just have to have a big bender, and you could bend these big, conduit hoops, and then make a wood frame on the bottom, a door, and then and this you probably want to get this, pay for the special plastic, especially since it's like you gotta have big plastic. But if you do this, it's fantastic. It's like this like a passive greenhouse. You can put in like fans and heaters and stuff, but a lot of people just use it as a passive one. They'll have cranks on the sides where they can actually roll up the sides, so they want to grow all year in it. Like some of our partners will yeah, they'll keep it on the sides open and they'll grow all year. And then during the winter, they'll bring the sides down and they'll grow all winter as well. It's pretty awesome. You can get shade tarps to cool it down as well. This is the crank that they can raise up the sides. And you can actually even have additional, row covers as well if it gets really, really cold. And some people will like do compost piles inside of them to to heat it up because compost will make some extra heat. So really great. What's great about hoop houses as well is you do not need a building permit. So if you want to build a greenhouse, if it's bigger than 50 square feet, you got to get all kinds of permits. But from DCRA, which is a nightmare. But if you want to just build a hoop house, you don't need to get any permits unless you bring in like utilities or something. All right, so that was our season extension. So disclaimer, I mean, like a lot of this stuff, like I feel like I should always have a disclaimer. Like a lot of these like rodents and critters, you're probably not going to experience too many of them. Or you may get some squirrels or something like that. But a lot of the times it's just luck whether you get hit or not. And then season extensions, I mean, if you're not interested in growing over the winter, you don't really need to know all this stuff. But so I just want to give that disclaimer, especially if you're a beginning gardener, you don't need to worry about too much about what we talked about. But I do want to talk about, I think everyone can kind of benefit from the next couple sections. We're going to talk about some basic carpentry and what kind of materials we want to use for our gardens. And yeah, so let's start with wood. So for sure, most garden beds and most gardens have some type of wood in there. So you want to know what kind of wood that you're dealing with. So we're just going to kind of go through like the basics of the type of wood that construction wood and things like that. So you got your basic, kiln dried, wood. So this is kiln drying. If it's the one piece of wood that looks the most like wood. Yes, they just cut down the tree, they mill it, and then they dry it in a giant kind of like an oven. And then it won't last as long as like pressure treated or cedar. If you're making, especially if you're doing like 2x12s or something like that. If you're doing 2-inch boards. You can get like 3 to 5 years out of a raised bed, and it's hard to find like 4x4 or 6x6 kiln dried. So a lot of this stuff is cheap, it's super easy to find, it's super easy to work with, but it just won't last many years. So that's why some people will try other things like pressure treated wood. It's the next cheaper but longer lasting option. So pressure treated woods where they actually under pressure they push fungicides into the wood. So they used to use arsenic and all kinds of toxic stuff. They stopped doing that, I think, in the 80s and the 90s. What they're currently using is copper. It's like a micronized copper, which is organic, FDA or EPA approved, for gardening. But also it's like it is a fungicide. So some people don't like it in their gardens. It will leach out, over time. It won't kill all your biology, but it will leach out a little bit. You can like when we use it, we'll put like a food grade poly barrier in between that and the soil, just so it doesn't leach out into the soil. But it's not really that big of a deal. I think that's sometimes I feel like it's overkill. It won't leach that much fungicide to actually hurt your biology in your soil. But like I said, if you want to be completely organic, you don't want to use pressure treated. It lasts a really long time. It lasts much longer in kiln drying. You can get definitely you can get many more years. It's really easy to find 4x4s and 6x6s. This is most of the 4x4s and 6x6s are pressure treated. I mean, this is what people are building houses and big structures out of. So they want it pressure treated because they want it to last a really long time, especially if it's touching soil. If wood is touching the soil, it's going to rot a lot quicker. So if kiln dried wood, if you put that on soil, that part that's touching that soil is going to rot in a year or two. But pressure treated, it may be 5 or 10 years before you start seeing some kind of rot. It's also cheap, as well. But like I said, the OMRI, it's like organic management resource something. It's the people that oversee the organic materials. They do not allow pressure treated to make the organic qualifications. But like I said, a lot of people still use pressure treated. It's not the worst thing that you could put in your garden for sure. But then if you want if you want the year, if you want your wood to last a really long time, but you want it to be 100% natural, your third option is cedar. So cedar actually, and that's when you see the red boards. I think they smell like kind of lavendery. They have natural fungicides in the wood, in the sap of the wood, that keeps it and preserves it for a really long time. It will last really long. But the only problem is it's super expensive. You know, it can be like 3 to 5 times as expensive as all your other wood. But that's your 3 different options. Your cheapest won't last that long. You know, pressure treat is great, but it's if you don't want copper in your garden, you know, not the best option. And then cedar if you have the money. And then you hear about like hardwoods and softwoods. Most wood that you use in your garden or you find in construction or hardware stores is softwood. So hardwoods are really big old trees that take forever to grow, you know, like oaks and things like that. And they're super hard. You know, that's what makes great mushroom logs and stuff, because they have a lot of lignin in it and it takes forever for the mushrooms to use it all up. You know, that's great, but it's more expensive. It's definitely not as sustainable, because when they harvest things like oak trees, you know, it takes forever to go, you know, bring them back. But then like pine trees and spruce grow really quickly. So they're more softwoods. They're cheaper, they're more environmentally friendly, but they don't last as long as well. But I mean, most of the wood that you'll find that's not cedar, you'll find it will be like some kind of like pine at the grocery store, or not the grocery store, that hardware store. Sorry. And then, so this is the MCA material safety sheet. So when you are using pressure treated wood, you know, it is, you can tell, I mean, when you touch it, you'll get the copper. It's a moist wood, you know, and you know, when you handle it, especially when it's new, you'll get that copper on your hands. You just want to be careful not to rub it in your eyes. You know, you want to wash your hands before you eat, you know, things like that. I mean, it's like, it's not, like I said, it won't kill you, but it's definitely will irritate you pretty bad if you, yeah, rub it in your eyes, or you definitely don't want to burn pressure treated wood. You don't want to inhale that copper. So here's like the standard health hazards, if you are interested in it. This is kind of the you know, yeah, the standard safety sheet. And then lumber sizes. So it's really tricky, lumber sizes, because you get like a 2x4 is like a 2-inch board by a 4-inch board. But a 2x4 was cut 2 inches by 4 inches, and then it was processed. It was dried. It was, you know, kiln dried, or if it was pressure treated, or it went through all these different things. And what happens is all wood shrinks over time, you know, anywhere between 1/4 inch to 3/4 inches. So, so that you have to understand, when you're trying to design something, if you're designing with 2x4s, you have to look up the nominal inch. You know, what it starts out as is nominal as 2x4s, but what it actually is a 2x4 is actually 1.5 by 3.5. So 2x4s actually shrink in a 1/2 inch. So if you're trying to like design things on paper or on a program, just make sure to look up the actual, you know, distance. So just factor that in if you're trying to do exact measurements. But most times that's not a big issue in the garden. You know, you're just making boxes, so it's not, you know, a huge deal. And then if you're selecting lumber, so definitely be picky about the lumber. Definitely, you know, if you need to make a mess in the lumber categories, pull out all your boards. You know, you want to look, you know, what this person's doing. You want to look straight down it. You want to make sure if it's going to be bowing, or if it's going to be crooked or twisty. You know, you definitely want to try to get as straight as possible. You want to look for any, like, you know, rotting parts and stuff, and definitely don't get those. So you want to find as straight as possible board. Sometimes you know, it can take, you know, 10-15 minutes of pulling boards off, you know, until you find some good boards. And then yeah, but take your time selecting it. Number, and if it had number ratings, 1 is usually for like aesthetic stuff, so if you're making like cabinets. But for the garden stuff, you might, I mean, I don't think you need to pay for the really expensive stuff, so number 2 is usually fine. And then there's other types of materials, like bamboo. Bamboo is really fantastic for building, you know, structures in the garden. If you need to build trellises, like pea trellises, you know, windbreaks, arbors, you know, It's pretty amazing. It's all, and it's like super invasive. So it spreads like crazy. So if you go on some kind of listserv, there's going to, be someone being like, hey, I have a bunch of bamboo. Does anybody want to cut it down? Um, or you can send that out on a listserv, saying looking for bamboo. I bet you'll find somebody, because it spreads like, if you have it in your backyard, it's really hard to get rid of it. And usually people like it when you come and cut down their bamboo for you. Definitely want to use like a pruning saw, or like a machete works really great to getting all the lateral branches off as well. But you can cut it up. You can build structures out of it using different kinds of this is called lashings, where you put them together and just get some string. And I mean, there's like special techniques, but usually you just wrap it as much as possible and tie it off, or you can use zip ties. It's super easy. And you can grow bamboo. You just want, if you want to, just I would recommend like doing like a raised bed and putting some landscape fabric on the bottom. You just want to contain it, so it doesn't spread all over like crazy. But you can, intentionally grow it so it's not like too crazy. But you just gotta be very intentional about it, or you just find people that have bamboo. Like yeah, just said, yeah, we already have someone that said they have bamboo if anyone's looking. And then the last thing about wood, you can actually use regular wood branches as well. We just did this. We created what was called a wattle fence. So we had a fence. We had a tree that we took down that had all kinds of rot at the base, and it had tons of extra branches as well. So we used we actually built a whole wattle fence from this tree, which is pretty great. It's yeah, it was pretty easy. Like you just we dug a bunch of holes, but the bigger posts into the ground. I'll show you in a second how to dig dig post holes. Have a line, string, so we made sure everything was like straight. And then we just grabbed all the branches that you can kind of bend a little bit but had some strength to it, and just kind of weaved it in and out. And this is really fantastic for like wind breaks. It will allow some wind to go through, but it will break up most of the wind. You can also use it for trellises. We're going to plant a bunch of passion flowers to grow all over it. The bees are on the other side. This is a perfect bee break as well. So if you are digging post holes, so if you're digging a fence or something similar, or like a bit heavy duty trellis, definitely recommend getting, we have these post hole diggers in our tool share if you ever need some, or we have these trench shovels to use, or you can actually, like for Home Depot, if you got a lot of trench holes, you can actually rent a machine that will dig a lot of holes yourself. And then the idea is, yeah, ideally you want to get below the frost line, which is like technically 3 feet. It's like 2.5 feet in the urban area. But if you ever dug a hole, digging a hole that's 2.5 feet is pretty hard. So I usually give up about halfway there and just stick the post in the hole, and then backfill it with your gravel or concrete if you want to make it super duper sturdy, or just backfill dirt, and you can get these little post levels you can attach to it. You can keep it level on every side as you're like filling it up and tampering it down. So all right, so next thing we're going to talk about is hardware for gardens. Like, what type of hardware do you want to use? So hardware is like the metal, I typically think of like hardware as being metal brackets and screws and all the things that you use to like put together the wood, timbers and things like that. So the first thing you want to know, if we talked about this already, is hardware cloth. If you're trying to make things rat proof or mouse proof, or bird proof or things like that, you definitely want to use hardware cloth. Chicken wire isn't that it's definitely not rat proof, and a lot of other things can get through it as well. And then the types of metals that you want to use in the garden. So typically most people use galvanized metal, like galvanized steel, which is there's different things that you can see, a chemical reaction or electrical reaction or something. I know there's different ways to galvanize it, but it's basically steel that won't really rust. It looks kind of dirty, it's definitely not like stainless steel that looks all pretty and shiny, but it's overall, it's typically what you want to use. It won't rust, it will last a really long time, and it's cheaper than stainless steel, which stainless steel, if you want to make things look really nice, and pretty, you can use it, but it's definitely going to cost you a little bit more money. And then these are nice. Like if you're using screws and stuff, they're like basically galvanized screws that have polymer coating that has like plastic coatings that goes over it. That just makes it extra, extra weather resistant. But all these other things like bronze, brass, zinc and steel, they're not as good. One, they don't work well with pressure treat. A lot of them doesn't work well with pressure treated wood. Like the copper will react badly to different things, and will actually start rusting and deteriorating them quicker. And then you also, yeah, a lot of these things will just rust quicker or aren't as weatherproof. So I would definitely either do like galvanized steel or some kind of polymer coated, material. So types of screws and fasteners. So you can use nails. Nails have what you call better shear strength. So if you're like hammering a nail into the wall and hanging the painting, you want to use a nail because it won't snap it, snap in half as easily as like a screw. So that's, great to hanging things. Nails are great, but if you want to attach things, really well together, definitely look for screws, especially if you're putting together raised beds. I definitely have noticed, like, I've done nails, with nail guns, and we had to build a whole bunch of raised beds, and they fall apart a lot quicker than using screws. So I definitely would recommend screws. They definitely will have a tighter bond. And one thing about screws is like the more points the screw has, like it starts off like the history of screws, it start off with just a line, like and then you have a Phillips head, and you start getting more and more, and suddenly you have a star bit and the hex bits, and the more points you have, that the easier it is to screw because it has more torque, so you'll get more power from it, and it'll be harder to actually strip the screw, which is when you mess up the top and then you can't do anything with it. So definitely try. I typically would recommend, some kind of star bit is what we use. So it's a lot easier to use, especially if you're using like old wood and things. But yeah, and it's a lot harder to strip as well. When you're buying screws, there's going to be a bunch of numbers. The first number is like the diameter, so it's how thick the screw is going to be. And then sometimes there's a thread count as the second number, but usually not. And then the last number is usually like the length and the inch. So nine is a typical diameter, and it's 2.5 inches. So this is definitely a typical screw you would use. And you definitely so deck mates are the poly coated ones. I definitely would recommend using these. These are going to last the longest out of all the screws, the deck mates. And then timber locks, if you're trying to put like 4x4s or 6x6s together, I definitely recommend using these timber locks. These are called lag screws. They have a special bit, and you just get enormous amount of torque. They're actually really fun to use, and especially if you have like a raised bed that's like falling apart, like the screws are coming out on one corner and you can't get it back together. Just get a couple of these, and it will repair it really easily. All right, so next section we're going to talk about is power tools. We're just going to do a couple basics on power drills and saws and things like that. So we're talking about the basic power drill. We're going to talk about the impact driver and the power drill. So basic power drill, most people are probably familiar. That's these are nice because you can switch the usually they have numbers on the side you can turn. So if you're doing very delicate wood, you can use the lower strength, and if you're trying to if you need a lot of power, you can put it up, crank it up to the higher number. So it's nice because it's sometimes like some wood, especially like dry wood, like kiln dried wood, could crack if you don't pre-drill it, or if you're using too much power. So you can get corded or battery. I definitely recommend, if you're doing battery, at least 18 volt or higher. You're just not going to get enough torque if you don't have that, if it's not at least 18 volts. And then you can, and definitely if you're having trouble with something, definitely check. There's a little button that you push forward and backwards when you're pulling screws in and out. So you definitely want the arrow point forward if you're driving it in, and backwards if you're taking a screw out. So I am going to show you a video really quick because it's a lot easier than explaining the whole chuck torque thing. But when you're actually, how do you actually remove the screw bit? I'll show this.
The part of the drill that holds the bit in place is called the chuck. Inside the chuck, there are 3 jaws, which you can see when you rotate the collar, the jaws either open or close depending on which direction you're rotating the collar. The most important thing to remember when you're installing a bit is to make sure that the bit is centered between all 3 jaws of the chuck. That's typically not a problem with a larger bit, but with a smaller bit, it can actually get stuck between 2 out of the 3 jaws of a chuck like this, and you can still tighten it down, but you won't be able to drill a hole because the bit will be spinning off center. Now that you understand how the bit is held in place, let's talk a little bit about chucks. The first is called a keyless chuck, and that's typically what you're going to find on most portable drills. How this works is you just install a drill bit, make sure it's centered between the jaws, and turn the collar until it's tight.
Yeah, another quicker and easier way to do it.
All right, these are going to be some instructions on how to change your bit on a cordless electric drill. All right, this is a DeWalt XRP. I love this piece of machinery right here, and it's pretty similar to a lot of drills out in the industry. You got your trigger, which is gonna, you push that to allow it to work, and then you got a little button over here that's gonna be your reverse and forward. So that little button kind of goes back and forth like that, and it has a little arrow on it, so it says backwards. So when you hit the trigger, it's screwing to the left, lefty loosey, righty tighty. All right. So now the question is, how do you change this bit? All right, and it's like I said, this drill is similar to a lot of drills. There's going to be a chuck on the end, and really, you can either manually do it with your hand, but I'm going to show you in this video how to do it with the drill itself. So, if you want to remove the drill bit, all right, you're going to put the switch right there to the left. Okay, so lefty loosey, we're gonna loosen it, and then I just grab hold of this chuck and squeeze. All right, that's going to loosen that bit. All right, so that's lefty loosey, and then forward, righty tighty, put it right back. So here goes the drill bit. Standard little screwdriver, you put a drill in there, whatever you want to do. So I'm gonna loosen it up. It's gonna open up wide, and then you gotta kind of do 2 things at once here. You put it in right in the middle, and you gotta hold on to it. And then you switch your gears, and you're gonna go forward, righty tighty, and just screw it on. Sometimes it comes a little awkward, but you just kind of play with it so you get it right.
All right, so I wanted to show you 2 different ways to change the bits. All right, and then you have what's called an impact driver. So this is actually my favorite kind of power drill because this has a lot more torque. It's really great for building like compost bins and things, and also deconstructing things. So it's like a dry, normal power drill, but you don't have that many options on power. You can have, it's called a speed control trigger. You can barely touch the trigger, and it will slow it down a little bit, but overall you have a lot of torque. And basically, because you have this hammer mechanism, it'll make this dot 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 sound when it needs extra power, and that's normal. It's actually this hammer mechanism that's giving you lots of extra torque. And this is what you want to use if you're using timber locks, or if you have, if you're drilling in 4x4s or 6x6s, or just having like a lot of, if you're trying to build extra things. Just know that it has a different chuck. The chuck is this little tiny thing, and it's real simple. You just kind of you grab it and you pull it upward, and then the bit will pop right out, and then you can just put the new bit in. But you need the only thing about it is you need the bits that have this little notch at the end, because if it doesn't, it's not going to hold on to the screw or the bit. It's just going to come right out. So you can't use normal power drill bits. You have to use these special ones with notches, but you can get adapters as well that if you need to. And then a couple tips when you're using these power drills. So this is what a strip screw looks like. So this is like, if you ever heard someone just making an awful sound with their screw, it's just what they're doing is they're stripping their screw. And that so if you're ever doing that, you want to immediately stop and kind of reassess the situation. First thing is you want to make sure, am I going in the right direction? If I'm taking a screw out, am I going in backwards where the arrow is pointing towards me? Or if I'm putting a screw in, and is it forwards? Because that's like, even like the most professional people make that mistake pretty often. But if that's good, right, you want to check the bit and make sure the bit isn't worn down, and I don't know if I explained, bits are these what actually you put screws and drills in. So that's the bit part. So you want to make sure that's not worn down. If it's a really tough wood, maybe you should pre-drill. Pre-drill means to like drill a hole first and then do a screw in. I'll make it a lot easier to drill. But then if you most of the time though, the problem is you're not putting enough pressure, and that's because you always see people hold a power drill like this with their bottom hand, and that it may work if you're drilling into something really soft, and but you really like whenever we're building compost bins with volunteers and stuff, you have to kind of show people how to actually hold it. You want to hold, especially if you're stripping screws, you want to put your second hand, the first hand on the trigger, the second hand on the back of it, and you really just want to put your whole body into it. You want to put as much down pressure as possible, and that's going to prevent you from actually stripping your screws, especially if it's like a tough surface. You want to, sometimes I'll put even my chest on it, and I'll just push my, with my whole body onto it, and that will keep your screw from stripping. So you definitely want to don't hold your power drills like this. Hold it like this, with the hand on the back. And if you ever have these like horrible screws, you can actually get screw extractors that actually drill in, and it makes a new, top screw for you to pull it out. So if that does happen, and you really need that screw out, you can get these for like $5 or $10 at the hardware store. We have some in our tool share as well if you need to. And then this is a very common mistake when people are building things in gardens, especially when they're using these half-threaded screws. A lot of times you'll get through like a 2-inch board, and then all the parts of the thread will stick out. And then the smooth part, I don't really understand why it's not all thread, but the smooth part will be in the wood, and then you'll try to pull the out with the drill, and it'll just spin. So if that ever happens, get another piece of wood, put that board on top of that wood to give it a little traction, and then push it down, and you can take it out, or get a hammer it back a couple whacks until the thread's in the wood, and then you should be able to take it out from there. And then I want to talk, the next section, we're going to talk about saws really quickly. So a couple of safety tips on saws: always wear safety glasses, ear protections. If you're sawing indoors, you definitely want a dust mask. Make sure that the blades aren't, too old. You don't want to check the blades. Make sure you got like a decent blade. It's not something super rusty and dull. Make sure you always have a clear path. You don't have like hanging clothes. Put your hair in a ponytail, things like that. And the first saw I want to talk about is a miter saw, or a chop saw. And this looks like the most intimidating saw, but this is actually the safest saw and the easiest one to use. What's nice about it, so it's just like a chop. You just kind of the triggers you put your on top of here. You turn it on. You put the board on laid it across the platform, push it back. It's nice to get like some bricks or something if it's a really long board, so it's not tilted some way. You want to keep it as flat as possible. You make your line on where you want to cut, and it's just a quick chop. You turn it on, chop it, and turn it off, and it's super easy. You can turn it. You can make sideways cuts. You can make all different kinds of angle cuts as well. It's pretty versatile. But the one thing that took me forever when I first got one is there's a safety pin on the back, so you want to pull that safety pin out before you can actually make that chop. But this one's really easy to use. We have these in our tool share if you ever want to borrow one. Sawzalls or reciprocal saws. So this one is a little bit harder, and you're definitely not going to make it as easy or clean as the cuts. But this is you use that for a lot of deconstruction, especially if you're taking apart, a compost bin or something like wood that has a lot of nails. So basically you have this little clamp that you pull upwards and it opens a hole in the top, and then you can slide these blades. If you're cutting metal or metal and wood or wood, you slide the blade in, and you're good to go. This is a shoe part, the front part. You put that against the surface that you're cutting, and then it'll cut really quickly through metal, through wood. It's a really great if you need to make a cut, if you're doing demolition, or if you need to make cuts in the moment, especially if you're out, if you don't have a giant miter saw or chop saw, it works pretty well. But you're definitely not going to make very clean cuts as well. So and then you have circular saws. So this one's nice. It's probably a little bit, it's a little trickier. A couple of safety things. You want to make sure the cord, usually they're corded. You can get battery ones, but if there's a cord, make sure you're not about to cut the cord. There's usually a little notch right here, and that's what you line up the line, and that's going to be your guiding point. If you want to make deep cuts or shallow cuts, you have you can adjust the forgetting the name of that, the platform on the bottom. You can actually you can actually adjust it to you can raise it or lower it to make the blade, to make a deeper cut or a shallow cut, especially if you're like cutting two boards on top of each other and you just want to cut the top one. You can adjust it so you can cut the top and leave the bottom one. It's pretty easy to use. And then the only thing though, the main safety thing about cutting is how you set it. You want to prevent binding. So binding is when if you have two of these sawhorses and you just cut this, board right in the middle, what's going to happen is like when you get halfway through this board, the board's going to fall inward, and it's actually going to pinch your blade. And it's going to stop your blade. Normally it just stops it, and it's annoying. I mean, if you have a really powerful tool, it could kick the board up a little bit. So that's why when you're cutting things, you want to, have, what the part that you're cutting off, you want it to be hanging off an edge of a table, or like if you're using two sawhorses, you want to cut the edge that's hanging off. And that way that the piece just falls off instead of falling inward and binding. And then measuring this, I think this is the last thing we'll talk, okay, sorry. So measuring, measuring tape, you got inches, half inches, quarter inches, eighth inches, 16th inches, depending on what you need. If you're measuring a board, you want to keep the measuring tape as parallel to the sides as possible. And then I really like using these, you make a little crow foot where you want to cut, and then use one of these. They're called speed squares, where you put this, it's a triangle that you put up against the side of the wood. And that way you can make, if you make two crow's feet, you can actually make a line through, and that's what, you can cut on that line. That's going to make it much easier. And then all kinds of levels as well, like the post levels. If you want to, I really love these string levels. If you want to tell if a ground is sloping or not, you can use these string levels. And then hand tools, I'm going to go through this one really quickly, and just so we can talk about raised beds, so we don't run out of time. Saws, you got, carpenter saws, pruning saws, hacksaws. Carpentry saws are nice. I use pruning saws. If you ever use a pruning saw, it's like the best saw for cutting branches and for normal wood. So I'll use this when I want to cut normal branches, or not only just pruning a tree, but also when I want to cut boards as well. I find pruning saws work really, really well. But eventually they get dull. You can replace the blade, or sometimes it's just cheaper to just buy a whole new saw. Hacksaws, if you want to cut through metal like Conduit, it's a good idea to get some hacksaws. Saw tips. So if you ever it's actually, we do a lot of carpentry classes, and I hope, we can start this up soon, because it's a lot easier to show people in person rather than trying to explain online. But Starting a cut is the hardest part. I do this technique where I'll put my thumb up to the blade and I'll just gradually, very gently kind of, just move the saw backwards a little bit, and I'll try to cut out a little channel. And once I have that channel, then you can start doing like the long strokes. Once you get going, you want to do long, straight, perpendicular strokes as much as possible. Hammers, you want to make sure it's, try to make it perpendicular. If you're afraid of hitting your finger, you can use these clothespins, or if you got really tiny nails, you can actually use like a little piece of paper, put it through to hold it. Yeah, some of these stuff I'm sure people use, like pry bars are really great when you're like deconstructing compost bins and things. And then staple guns is just a fancy word for like an outdoor stapler. But it is a little tricky. It's different than the normal stapler. One way it's different, like loading the stapler. So everyone always loads it wrong. They try to put it in the back like an office stapler, but most of them you pull out the back, and then you actually put the staples in the you pull out the back and you put it in the back for most of these staplers, but that graphic's a little confusing, sorry. But the main thing about stapler is you just want to make sure it's the whole thing is completely down on the surface, and it's not like propping up at an angle or it won't go in well. But staplers, there are no good outdoor staplers. They all kind of suck. So but all right, so yeah, sorry, I just want to get through that. And then now the last chapter section, we're just going to talk about a little bit about how to actually build some raised beds. The first part, like building raised beds. So there's a couple, strategies to try. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to try, do raised beds, but I'll talk about a couple typical ones. But when you're building the raised bed, if you find a flat surface, like a level slide walk, a basketball court, something, it's going to be so much easier if you can find a flat surface to do this on. Because if you do it on an unflat surface, it's not going to be level and square. I definitely recommend these speed squares are really great. So when you actually make your box, you can make sure you have a 90-degree angle on the speed square. So they're very versatile. They're cheap as well. Everyone should have like a $3 speed square. You can use, it's called serpentine, when you're making the box. That's when it's that thing where that picture where that snake is eating a snake is like this perpetual thing. But that's nice if you but you can put together your box any way you want. This is, I mean, if you can make it serpentine, that's fine, but that's not all right if you don't. So the idea is you kind of one of the things I would recommend when you're doing raised beds is having these corner pieces, having some kind of, so if you're making them out these bed boards, buy an extra board, chop it up, and have some corner pieces. And then because that's going to really increase your durability in the long run. So if you don't do the corner pieces, eventually your corners are going to come out, they're going to bow over years, but the corner pieces are definitely going to buy you a lot. So the idea is you put the you find a flat surface, put the wood together using a speed square, put in some corner pieces, and then use like 2 to 4 screws to put screw into the corner pieces and into the boards itself. Better use more screws and less screws. Definitely don't use the screws too close to the edges, or you kind of snap it out. And if you're using kiln dried, it might be a good idea to pre-drill your hole, because kiln dried has a tendency to crack easier as opposed to like pressure treated, because it's so moist. You can just drill right into pressure treated. And then the idea is and if you are going to pre-drill, you want to find so the diameter of the screw you're using, you want to find that same, and not the thread, but the actual diameter of the cylinder. You want it to be the same as, or smaller as the drill you're using, because the idea is you want the hole to be a little bit smaller than the actual screw, so that way the screw can actually grip onto something, and it's not just going to fall out. And the idea, and really you just put it all, you screw them all again all the corner pieces together, and then you got a raised bed, and then you can pick it up and move it to wherever you need to, in your garden. You can build it in place as well. It's just nicer sometimes to have that flat surface. So, and then bring it to where you want it, and then kind of dig out, because you'll have it easier. It'll be more level. But it's also a good idea to bring a level out, and make sure that the bed is level as possible. So I'm going to show a video of what that actually looks like. And then yeah, just go.
So let's start with the supplies that we're going to need. A real simple project. I purchased two 2x8x8. They come 8 feet long. I went to my local Home Depot and I asked them to cut them in half for me, or just 2 4-foot lengths. We're going to make one 4-foot by 4-foot square raised garden bed. So with the 2 boards, we end up with 4 pieces that are 4 foot long, right? So we got these cut to 4-foot lengths. Then the only other thing you need is some scrap pieces of 2x4s, and these I already had on hand. You can purchase a separate full 2x4 board and get them to cut it down to size for you. I cut these at home. That you need to cut these at is basically the width of your board. I measured mine across this way. It measured about 7 3/8 inches, and so I just cut my 2x4s to that. And so you're going to need 4 pieces of those measurements. So aside from the wood boards, we're going to need some other basic woodworking supplies like a cordless drill. And then the screws that we're using here, I have 2.5-inch long. They're outdoor wood, outdoor deck screws and things like that. I got them at the 2.5-inch length because that's what I had on hand. You can go with the 3-inch ones. You just want to make sure that it's reaching all the way through both boards that you're screwing into, okay? But these are the ones that I prefer to use for these type of projects, because instead of having just a regular Phillips head, they have a star tip or a star head on them. So what I like about this little box is that it comes with the little bit that you need. And I find that these with the little star head, they don't strip out as easily. So they're easy to put in the wood and to reverse them if you have to. So let's talk a little bit about the wood that I'm using for the raised beds. We've gone here with 2x8s that are completely untreated pine wood. This is the cheapest wood that I can get. And this is going to be a really inexpensive way to make a raised bed if you actually have to go out and buy the wood. One problem that I have with using recycled materials and things is I don't really know if the stuff is treated or not. The label's not on it, right? And so it's hard for me to gauge. So I'd rather just go out and buy something that I know is completely untreated. I don't want any chemicals making contact with the soil that I'm using to raise my food. So we've gone with pine. Because it's untreated, it will deteriorate over time. And the amount of time is just going to depend. We built a chicken coop. We've had it up for about 2 years, and it still looks great. It's not painted, not sealed, and we also used untreated wood. I have friends that make their garden beds using untreated wood. Some say it lasted them 2 years, some 5 years, some are going on 7 years. So it just depends. For me, it's really inexpensive, and I think it's worth it to have the peace of mind that I know there's no chemicals going into what I'm using to feed my kids, right? So the 4 scrap pieces that we cut to the same width of our boards, we are going to get 1 on each end of just 2 of the boards. So 2 should be just plain like they are, and these 2 should have one of these little things on each end, just like this. Make it flush here, and flush with this edge, just like that. Then I'm going to hold it in place and pre-drill my holes. You can put them anywhere here. So these are the ones that I prefer to use. You see the little star thing? They don't strip as easily, so they work out great. And we're going to screw these into place. And I find that pulsing and going slow works better than trying to go too fast. So that's nice and secure. And we'll repeat that to all the other 3 sides. So now that we've screwed the little end blocks onto 2 boards, we're ready to start assembling it into the square bed. So I'm just going to put this up this way. The opposite end is going to go like this, and we're going to put these 2 boards in the middle and screw them right in. Super easy. This probably won't stay up, but let me grab one of these. And I set it up so that these blocks are inside, okay? So this is how I line it up. This is the corner one that we screwed into the sides, and I'm going to get one of the ones that doesn't have anything attached to it, and I'm going to put it on the outside. So this is flush here, it's all flush on the sides, and the corner 2x4 that we screwed into the inside is going to be an inside post. This is going to help stabilize it. So here we go. You can do the same thing that we did before and pre-drill the holes in here, But this is a quick project, and like I said, the wood is going to deteriorate anyway. So if there's a little bit of cracking, I don't mind too bad. So now you can drill either into this one or into this one if you want. I just like to look in here and see where these two screws are so that I make sure that I don't drill right where that one is, right? So here we can go in the middle somewhere. And again, because I haven't pre-drilled the hole, I'm just going to go nice and slow, just pulsing it. Like that. And I like to put 2 on each side. So I just did that corner there. Now I'm going to come here. You can see it's nice and stable. Here's the other one. Bring it to the inside. So this corner post is on the inside. Line up my outside parts here. And you may need to do this on a concrete surface or something level. I'm on my grass here. It's definitely not level, but it still works for me. I can still make it work. So I'm going to come around this side and drill this board into the little corner chunk here that I screwed in previously. And all I have left to do is to screw this one board in the same way we just did that one. So after we screwed in these 2 here, I went back on each corner and screwed one more screw in on this bit, and you can see that it fits right here where this wood is. So this one is going now through the end grain of this one, and it helps stabilize that corner a lot more as well. So here is our finished 4-foot by 4-foot raised garden bed. You can see I've made a few other ones. This was just using 2x4s that I stacked up, so they're about the same height as the one that we made today. This is a great beginner project. For the 2x4s, if you can get them really cheap, I just stacked one on top of the other, and it ends up being the same height as the 2x8s that we use for this project. I hope you give this project a try.
All right. Well, just a disclaimer, this was definitely pre-pandemic prices, so I would probably triple that amount now. But so the last slide I'm going to talk about tonight is just so that was like if you're building like the 2-inch beds. So a lot of people, I mean, especially if you don't have a lot of funds, I mean, they'll you know, the 2-inch beds are great. I wouldn't build anything less than 2-inch thicks. Like some people I've seen build 1-inch beds. Those aren't going to last more than a year or 2. But the 2-inch beds, depending on the material you're going to use, should last you, 3 to 5 to 10 years, depending on what type of material you have. But if you want to last longer, if you want to shoot for decades. And if you want to make it a lot more accessible, I definitely recommend building raised beds out of 4x4s or 6x6s. This is our standard, what we build right now. We use 6x6s and we stack them 3 high, so that's 1.5 feet, which is it's like I think it's like is ADA compliant for accessible bed. And what's great about that is people can actually sit on the sides and do their garden, especially if you have mobility issues. You don't have to bend over the whole time. You can actually sit on the side, and this is going to last like 50 years. I mean, it does cost a lot more, but at the same time you're gonna it's going to last you in the long run. You're going to save money because you're going to have to keep on replacing those 2-inch boards. I do have like the numbers. They are pre-pandemic numbers, but I do have those numbers on I think the first class. I don't think I included it in this presentation. If you want to look at different costs, comparisons between 2-inch boards and 4x4s and 6x6s, but definitely recommend, if possible, and especially if you plan on gardening in a certain spot for more than 5 years, checking out 4x4s or 6x6s, and you can drill holes in them and then hammer rebar. That's like the traditional way to put them together. But timber locks work so much easier. So if you're using like 4x4s, you want to use a 6-inch timber lock, or 6x6s, use an 8-inch timber lock, and you can put these together. I mean, they are a little hard to move, but once you get all the materials on the site, you can put these beds together super quickly. And then if you want to learn more about different types of carpentry and critter resistance and things like that, there's definitely some more further reading. And yeah, that's tonight's class. I'm gonna try to get some kind of actual hands-on carpentry class going this summer at some point. We'll see if we can get that going. But in the meantime, hopefully this was at least an intro to a lot of different things and options. But I'll stick around if anyone has any more questions or comments. But